This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For further information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Andy Minter. The Card, A Story of Adventure in the Five Towns, by Arnold Bennett. Chapter 3. The Pantechnicon. 1. "How do you do, Miss Earp?" said Denry, in a worldly manner which he had acquired for himself by taking the most effective features of the manners of several prominent citizens and piecing them together, so that as a whole they formed Denry's manner. "Oh, how do you do, Mr. Machin?" said Ruth Earp, who had opened her door to him at the corner of Tudor Passage and St. Luke's Square. It was an afternoon in July. Denry wore a new summer suit, whose pattern indicated not only present prosperity, but the firm belief that prosperity would continue. As for Ruth, that plain but piquant girl was in one of her simpler costumes, blue linen, no jewellery. Her hair was in its usual calculated disorder. Its outer fleeces held the light. She was now at least 25, and her gaze disconcertingly combined extreme maturity with extreme candour. At one moment a man would be saying to himself, "This woman knows more of the secrets of human nature than I can ever know," and the next he would be saying to himself, "What a simple little thing she is." The career of nearly every man is marked at the sharp corners with such women. Speaking generally, Ruth Earp's demeanour was hard and challenging. It was evident that she could not be subject to the common weaknesses of her sex. Denry was glad. A youth of quick intelligence, he had perceived all the dangers of the mission upon which he was engaged, and had planned his precautions. "May I come in a minute?" he asked, in a purely business tone. There was no hint in that tone of the fact that once she had accorded him a supper dance. "Please do," said Ruth. An agreeable flouncing swish of linen skirts as she turned to precede him down the passage. But he ignored it. That is to say, he easily steeled himself against it. She led him to the large room which served as her dancing academy, the bare boarded place in which, a year and a half before, she had taught his clumsy limbs the principles of grace and rhythm. She occupied the back part of a building of which the front part was an empty shop. The shop had been tenanted by her father, one of whose frequent bankruptcies had happened there, after which his stock of the latest novelties in inexpensive furniture had been seized by rapacious creditors, and Mr. Earp had migrated to Birmingham, where he was courting the official receiver anew. Ruth had remained solitary and unprotected, with a considerable amount of household goods which had been her mother's. Like all professional bankrupts, Mr. Earp had invariably had belongings which, as he could prove to his creditors, did not belong to him. Public opinion had justified Ruth in her enterprise of staying in Bursley on her own responsibility and renting part of the building in order not to lose her connection as a dancing mistress. Public opinion said that there would have been no sense in her going dangling after her wastrel of a father. "Quite a long time since we saw anything of each other," observed Ruth, in rather a pleasant style, as she sat down and as he sat down. It was. The intimate ecstasy of the supper dance had never been repeated. Denry's exceeding industry in carving out his career, and his desire to graduate as an accomplished clubman, had prevented him from giving to his heart that attention which it deserved, having regard to his tender years. "Yes, it is, isn't it?" said Denry. Then there was a pause, and they both glanced vaguely about the inhospitable and very wooden room. Now was the moment for Denry to carry out his prearranged plan in all its savage simplicity. He did so. "I've called about the rent, Miss Earp," he said, and by an effort looked her in the eyes. "The rent?" exclaimed Ruth, as though she had never in all her life heard of such a thing as rent, as though June 24th, recently past, was an ordinary day like any other day. "Yes," said Denry. "What rent?" asked Ruth, as though for aught she guessed it might have been the rent of Buckingham Palace that he'd called about. "Yours," said Denry. "Mine?" she murmured. "But what has my rent got to do with you?" she demanded. And it was just as if she had said, "But what has my rent got to do with you, little boy?" "Well," he said, "I suppose you know I'm a rent collector?" "No, I didn't," she said. He thought she was fibbing out of sheer naughtiness, but she was not. She did not know that he collected rents. She knew that he was a card, a figure, a celebrity, and that was all. It is strange how the knowledge of even the cleverest woman will confine itself to certain fields. "Yes," he said, always in a cold, commercial tone, "I collect rents." "I should have thought you'd have preferred postage stamps," she said, gazing out of the window at a kiln that was blackening all the sky. If he could have invented something clever and cutting in response to this sally, he might have made the mistake of quitting his rôle of hard, unsentimental man of business. But he could think of nothing. So he proceeded sternly. "Mr. Herbert Calvert has put all his property into my hands, and he has given me strict instructions that no rent is to be allowed to remain in arrear." No answer from Ruth. Mr. Calvert was a little fellow of 50, who had made money in the mysterious calling of a commission agent. By reputation he was really very much harder than Denry could even pretend to be. And indeed Denry had been considerably startled by the advent of such a client. Surely, if any man in Bursley were capable of unmercifully collecting rents on his own account, Herbert Calvert must be that man. "Let me see," said Denry further, pulling a book from his pocket and peering into it. "You owe 5 quarters' rent, £30." He knew without the book precisely what Ruth owed, but the book kept him in countenance, supplied him with needed moral support. Ruth Earp, without the least warning, exploded into a long peal of gay laughter. Her laugh was far prettier than her face. She laughed well. She might, with advantage to Bursley, have given lessons in laughing as well as in dancing, for Bursley laughs without grace. Her laughter was a proof that she had not a care in the world, and that the world for her was naught but a source of light amusement. Denry smiled guardedly. "Of course, with me it's purely a matter of business," said he. "So that's what Mr. Herbert Calvert has done!" she exclaimed, amid the embers of her mirth. "I wondered what he would do. I presume you know all about Mr. Herbert Calvert," she added. "No," said Denry, "I don't know anything about him, except that he owns some property, and I'm in charge of it. Stay!" He corrected himself. "I think I do remember crossing his name off your programme once." And he said to himself, "That's one for her. If she likes to be so desperately funny about postage stamps, I don't see why I shouldn't have my turn." The recollection that it was precisely Herbert Calvert whom he had supplanted in the supper dance at the Countess of Chell's historic ball somehow increased his confidence in his ability to manage the interview with brilliance. Ruth's voice grew severe and chilly. It seemed incredible that she had just been laughing. "I will tell you about Mr. Herbert Calvert." She enunciated her words with slow, stern clearness. "Mr. Herbert Calvert took advantage of his visits here for his rent to pay his attentions to me. At one time he was so far, well, gone, that he would scarcely take his rent." "Really?" murmured Denry, genuinely staggered by this symptom of the distance to which Mr. Herbert Calvert was once "gone." "Yes," said Ruth, still sternly and inimically. "Naturally, a woman can't make up her mind about these things all of a sudden," she continued. "Naturally," she repeated. "Of course," Denry agreed, perceiving that his experience of life and deep knowledge of human nature were being appealed to. "And when I did decide definitely, Mr. Herbert Calvert did not behave like a gentleman. He forgot what was due to himself and to me. I won't describe to you the scene he made. I'm simply telling you this so that you may know. To cut a long story short, he behaved in a very vulgar way.